Good morning, everyone. I'm the Reverend William Levwood, and my pronouns are he and him. I'm the minister here at Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church, and it's wonderful to see you all this morning, and I know many of you are joining online as well. With that in mind, I invite you, if you are at home, to close your other windows. If you're here, you might silence your phones and take a deep breath as we center ourselves for worship. We open and welcome to the ancestral people of this land, acknowledging that our church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahoac tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. I love that word, rests on the land. We seek healing and the realization of justice with the people of this land who live on in their descendants, the present-day members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Patawomeck Indian Tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move toward healing so that all together may one day know full justice.
We light this flame, the bright warmth of belonging, of companionship, of interdependence. We light this flame to remind us we belong to the earth, our sacred home. We light this flame to remind us we belong to human families, biological or chosen, and to the entire human family. We light this flame to celebrate this community here gathered, to which we belong, which claims our loyalty and affection. We light this flame to call to mind the transcendent, the holy, known by many names and by none, to which we also belong, which holds and sustains us. We light this flame in affirmation of the responsibility we share to make our communities ones where all belong. Welcome to Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Sheila Doles, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm happy to be your worship associate today. This congregation is a welcoming and inclusive community that seeks to create a more just and compassionate world. If you're new to Accotink and would like to talk more about this church, just about anybody here can tell you about it and would love to. You can speak to me, to our minister, Rev. William Levwood, or any of the greeters, or anybody with the woven cross needlepoint name tags like this. We've been around for a while. So whether you're a longtime member or a newcomer or something in between, we encourage you to stay for our social hour online or in person immediately after the service. We're so delighted that you decided to join us today. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Flip-Along, Animalphabet, written by Julia Donaldson and illustrated by Sharon King Chai. Who is fancier than an ant? A butterfly. Who has more legs than a butterfly? A caterpillar. Who is faster than a caterpillar? A deer. Who is bigger than a deer? An elephant. Who is pinker than an elephant? A flamingo. Who can butt better than a flamingo? A goat. Who is pricklier than a goat? A hedgehog. Who has more wrinkles than a hedgehog? An iguana. Who is more jiggly than an iguana? A jellyfish. Who can jump better than a jellyfish? A kangaroo. Who has more spots than a kangaroo? A ladybug. Who can dig deeper than a ladybug? A mole. Who can sing better than a mole? A nightingale. Who can hug tighter than a nightingale? An octopus. Who is muddier than an octopus? A pig. Who can fly better than a pig? A quail. Who has longer ears than a quail? A rabbit. Who can slither better than a rabbit? A snake. Who can growl better than a snake? A tiger. Who can avoid rain better than a tiger? An umbrella bird. Who is shyer than an umbrella bird? A vole. Who is bigger than a vole? A whale. Who is more see-through than a whale? An X-ray fish. Who is shaggier than an X-ray fish? A yak. Who has more stripes than a yak? A zebra. Who is smaller than a zebra? Go back to the beginning of the book. Thanks for reading along. Come back next week for another story.
Remember, by Joy Harjo. Remember the sky that you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon. Know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn. That is the strongest point in time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father. He is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, and their histories too. They are alive poems. Remember the wind. Remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember, you are all people, and all people are you. Remember, you are this universe, and this universe is you. Remember, all is in motion is growing, is you. Remember, language comes from this. Remember the dance that language is, that life is. Remember.
So I mentioned technology a moment ago, how we can get focused in on our screens. And it's a concern nowadays. And certainly there's good uses to any technology. And I see it being used well in schools, just as television was used through Sesame Street and other programs when I was a child. But we also know that it has negative effects. Not only is it designed to be addictive, particularly social media, to give you those hits of dopamine, but in this moment I'm just struck with that way that it pulls us in and narrows our focus. But I want to ask, do we ever think about the effect of other technologies, earlier technologies? That's what philosopher David Abrams has done, cautioning us about the technology of the written word. The written word and how it has encouraged, in a similar way, right? That foreshortening of our view, how it's encouraged a language of unbelonging. But I want to start, as David Abrams does, by walking us through the development of language a little bit. And he starts in a wonderful place. He brings up cave paintings. And I wouldn't think of that as language, but they are images, and they're meant to convey, what we think they're meant to convey is the hunt and knowledge about the hunt, and even a kind of magical way of, or maybe magical is, maybe it's the right word or maybe not, depending on how you view magic, but a way of getting our bodies into empathic resonance with the animal for the sake of the act of hunting. And then from that place, language continues to develop, and it first develops in images that become simplified into ideograms and pictographs, like in the Chinese language. And there, you're starting to see this symbol that does pull your attention away from the natural world, but it's still connected to the natural world because it's still an image or sometimes a quality, like wetness or tenseness, that the image evokes to make the word. And the next development, though, is as we move to the phonetic language. And it's interesting, I had never thought about how we got there. Abrams suggests that we may have gotten there using what's called a rebus. So if you're thinking of a more abstract terminology, like the word belief, this is the example he gives, you could come up with some images that evoke that for you. Or it might be just easier to have an image of a bee and an image of a leaf. Belief, belief, belief. And from that place, linguists think that's how we got to phoneticism, right? That we started to see, oh, that image can stand, an image can stand for a sound. And that's a real radical change. But when it happens, it's actually less radical in the beginning. It happens first in ancient Hebrew, and the letters are still, they become symbols for sounds, but they're still also words. They're still also images from nature. So for example, we talked 2 Sundays ago about Aleph, and the modern form of Aleph I showed is kind of like a cross between an X and a K, something like this. Or I always get confused about which way I should be making my body. But the original ancient Hebrew version was, the word Aleph meant ox. So it was an image of an ox head with horns. This is actually how we get our letter A today. So even though we're moving into an image, a symbol that stands for a sound, there's still at least a little bit of connection to the fact that it came from the natural world. Another example is the letter mem, which makes the M sound in Hebrew, and which has the the rolling waves in it, as you can still see in our letter M. But the next stage, you see how we're getting further away from nature and more into this realm of abstract symbol. Already we've gotten to the place where what writing does is not show any kind of picture or image, but a symbol for a sound, for human speech, not for the world around us, but for our speech. And the next development is when the Hebrew alphabet goes to Greece. And as you can imagine, now you lose even that small thread of connection. Because they don't know that Aleph means ox in this other language. They're just taking the alphabet and using it for Greek. So then the abstraction is complete. And now those symbols, I mean, that's how an A that stands for an ox can end up completely different, right? Because it doesn't need to have that image anymore. It's really just about the sound that it makes. So David Abrams suggests that this really disconnects us from nature. That from writing, and over time as writing spreads, because that takes a while. In fact, it doesn't catch on in Greece right away. They're not that interested. They have all these oral odes and hymns, Homer and all of that. And they're not that interested at first, but eventually it catches on, and then it catches on more, and then the printing press, and until there's a lot of literacy and a lot of the literate mind that is in discourse with other literate minds, with other human minds, and no longer in discourse or in conversation with the larger world. Which is where it began, remember, with those cave paintings, or even before that, with the way that we read the landscape. So we knew where the water sources were, or where the new water sources had shown up, or so that we could track an animal, or so that we could tell the difference between a soil that would grow one plant and a soil that would grow another, right? We were reading the landscape, but now, David Abrams suggests, increasingly as we move to the written word, we're just talking to each other. There's even a moment in Plato's writings where he describes Socrates saying, while he's out walking in nature, that the trees don't speak, that there's nothing to be gained from the babbling brook, that all the discourse that matters is now between us as human beings. Now, I don't want to overstate this. This is not the only thing that has disconnected us from nature, certainly, and there's other ideas philosophers have and historians have about what's created such a disconnect from nature, particularly in Western civilization. Abrams notes the two most common theories. Some historians and philosophers look to the Jewish and Christian traditions with their otherworldly God, and they see that as the primary responsibility for our negligent or even hostile view from the world, that we see this God, and I might add, the soul and another world after life, either a heaven or a hell that we go to. So now we're looking at that as what has real value. But it doesn't only happen in that biblical context. There's a parallel, again, in Greek culture with Plato and Socrates, and this idea that tree, I want to pause on this for a moment, that tree, that maple that's right over my driveway that drops this weird, sticky, sap-like thing all over my car so that I can't park in that part of the driveway during this time of year. That tree is not the real tree to Plato. The real tree is the idea of a tree, is the form of a tree that exists in some disembodied place. I think we lose we opened up our senses, right? Notice that when we're looking at words on a page, we're using our eyes, and the words stand for sounds. And I think if you think about tree, like if you think of that word, the general category of tree, an image comes to mind, a visual image, right? Probably a deciduous tree with its branches and its leaves. Did anybody see a conifer? A pine or a fir or a spruce? Anybody see the roots when that image comes to mind? Some of us now will see the roots. But we're not thinking about that sticky sap. We're not thinking about, in that moment of treeness, whether the leaves are going to change color and fall off in the winter. So it's closing us, it's even in that general category way, which is useful, of course, right? But the word is distancing us from the wide open, sensuous earth around us and our connection to it. So Abrams also points out that there's evidence that writing plays an important part of this because it's actually during the period that the written word is taking hold in Greece, that Plato writes down the dialogues of Socrates and puts forth these ideas. And if you think about it, this Platonic idea of this metaphysical thing that is the true thing, it kind of seems like a word, doesn't it? Right? It's kind of a symbol for the real thing. So there's that connection and the suggestion that maybe these things go together. I want to emphasize once again the human aspect of it too, which is that now, in one context, you have the immortal soul, and in another context, you have the rational mind, the literate mind, and these are the things that last, and the things that matter. Matter doesn't matter anymore. The soul matters. The mind matters. That other world, whether it's a heavenly world that we go after life, or a heavenly realm where the perfect tree is floating around, that's what matters now. Because it doesn't change, because it doesn't die, because it lasts. And when we put our focus there, and we include ourselves in that, either through the soul or through the life of the mind. So Abrams points out that this focus on human thought, the capacity to view and even dialogue with one's own words that we get after writing them down, that it enables this new sense of autonomy and independence, not only from others, but even from our sensuous surroundings. And the fact that one's scripted words can be returned to and pondered at any time, in any place, in any situation, outside of the place and time and situation they originated in, give a sense of relative independence to one's verbal speaking self, separate from the breathing body with its shifting needs. He says the literate self cannot help but feel its own transcendence and timelessness relative to the fleeting world. So Socrates does an interesting thing. I've been using the word soul and mind, but Socrates calls this reflective awareness the psyche. This reflective mind that turns away from the material world and focuses instead on the pure forms and ideas that Plato says are what truly exist, that are unchanging and eternal, and this dialogue with other humans about those unchanging forms. He calls the thing in us that can do that the psyche. But before that, the psyche was the life force flowing through the world. So I think if we're going to move from a language of unbelonging, from this narrowed in place where we're not even narrowed in just to the screen, we're narrowed into our own mind and our discourse with other minds. If we're going to change that, we need to reclaim the sense of psyche as, call it what you will, a spirit, a force, an animating life, a spirit of life, as we say in our hymn, that's flowing through the world. We need an animalphabet. An animalphabet, right? We need to reconnect with the platypus and the pig, the ostrich and the octopus, the ox, and the water that the ox drinks. We need to go back to reading with our bodies the world around us, opening our senses to the world around us. And there's one more part of this that I think is important. Remember, when we write something down, we take it out of that place that it was born, that context. So another thing that emerges at this time is this idea that there's truth, there's justice, there's freedom. They're like singular and universal. Whereas before, what you would have is a story that happened in a particular place, in a particular circumstance, a teaching story, grounded in the landscape. Oh, you walk under this tree, and you hear the story, or the story of why these two trees are intertwined. And that story becomes the story of a couple where there was neither master or servant, who lived into old age together and were generous to guests who came by and were rewarded by the gods who were in disguise as those guests. All of that comes to mind with that tree, and all those values of that culture come to mind. And maybe that example seems pretty universal. But when we divorce our ethics from the landscape and from the specific context of the moment and the changing world, two things happen. One, we think we can do the same thing here that we did here. We can do the same thing in the desert that we do in the rainforest, which is pave them over, right? Right? Because they don't matter anyways, because they're not going to last. What's going to last is that heavenly realm. And the other thing we do is that I think it contributes to our foreshortening of cultures. We start to say this one culture, this one book, to bring it back to the biblical example, has all the answers for all the different people in all the different places, with all their different cultures that come and grow from the places and the habitats and the specifics of those places and those habitats, and all the evolution that we are embedded in the world. And now it becomes this floating idea, and it's much easier to make a monoculture, to turn that one God not into an e pluribus unum, that is a vessel for the diversity in harmonious play together, but is fields and fields of one crop that you need pesticides to protect. So, I feel like I'm kind of up in the ether a little bit this week, but I want us that's kind of the point, right? Is to get up into that ether where Western civilization has placed our value in discourse only with other human beings and other human minds, and re-inhabit the world. And that's a language, as the poet Joy Harjo, who, if you don't know, by the way, is Muskogee Creek, our first poet laureate, who's an Indigenous American. She says, remember, language comes from this. After naming your father and your mother and birth and sundown and the sun's birth at dawn and the moon and the stars and all the earths, we are earth, red earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth, black earth, we are earth, she tells us. She says, unlike these platonic floating trees in the ether, she says, remember, all is in motion, all is growing, and all of that is you, is us. Remember, language comes from that energy flowing through the world, that it's a dance. Remember that. So may we deconstruct, may we use that reflective mind that writing has given us. It's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It kind of hypnotizes us sometimes. So break the hypnotizing spell when you need to, and go into the hypnotizing spell with choice, and then reconnect with the world. And use even the written word, as David Abrams did with writing about this. It's from a book, to help us reconnect and remember our connection and our belonging. Our belonging. We've been talking about belonging to a place, belonging in a community of people, but before all of that, we belong on this earth. We have co-evolved with all of the beings and creatures and elements of this earth. We belong here. Let's embrace that. May it be so, and may we be among those who make it so. Amen, 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 and blessed be.
Flame, we carry within us what we kindled, the light of inspiration, the warmth of compassion, the fire of commitment. May we bring these gifts into our lives and share them radiantly out into the world. I invite you to join me now in our community blessing with these words of David Bumba. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time, death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity.
I leave you with this charge, simply to go out into your day and lift up your gaze, open your ears, extend your sense of touch to feel the breeze, eat some good food, smell it before you eat it, and really enjoy this wonderful world that we belong to. And then may we take that love that we receive and give it back and care for the earth.